Hello and welcome to the Mull It Over podcast with the Dr. Richard Mull, who is distracted. He's texting.
I was halfway through a text when you said, okay, we're ready to go. And I'm like, I got to finish this. So I got it out.
That's my bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I get nervous when we have a guest on that my dad's going to start talking to people and start asking questions to him and use up all the good material before we start the podcast. So I usually go pretty quick to get started.
Yep, just dives in.
So do you want to go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yeah, excited to have Sam Dorman on. And I remember when he first called me because we get a lot of interesting calls. What he does, what we do is outside the box. And so, and one of the things we've talked about is you have to vet people. You have to go, how real is this person? Because we're going to be talking some today about SRA, satanic ritual abuse. And Sam is a young man who is an investigative reporter and has begun that journey. So at first I'm going, is it someone trying to spy on us? Because that, and that sounds like crazy, but we'll see, hopefully, even in this interview today, that I'm not just weird sounding. But
I'm about to say, your voice is fading. It is fading.
My text was to a small group tonight saying I'm not going to be there because of this. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this interview and Sam's journey and what got him into all this stuff. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I remember meeting you first time in Florida. Wish I could be there right now. I'm sure it's pretty hot there, though.
A little bit.
Been going on to Florida for a long time, so yeah.
Where are you from?
I'm from Northern Virginia.
Okay.
I'm currently further out west now. And it's just it's a lot colder than I'm used to. So
okay.
I definitely miss going to Florida.
Oh yeah. Go weather.
Yeah.
All right. So you're an investigative journalist. Is that my dad's title for you? Is that how you title yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a journalist. I do investigations into different issues. More recently I've been focused on trafficking, and satanic ritual abuse. So
how are those two connected?
Yeah. Let's say, how do you get into that?
Yeah.
Answer his question first. We'll get.
How did I get into it? Yeah, it's a long story. I would say, I was pretty interested in trafficking and covering things like prostitution when I was at a news outlet before this. So I'm like a freelancer now and kind of work for different outlets. But I was at a bigger outlet before, and just I was mostly covering abortion, fetal tissue trafficking. I started getting more interested into trafficking more generally, and just kind of had heard about some of these secret societies and some of their activities, but wasn't really sure about connecting the satanic element to trafficking. And so yeah, it was just kind of a thing that I felt like I had to overcome, and was asking God for some guidance on that. And ended up watching a documentary where they interviewed a trafficker, and the trafficker described having satanic clients who would come in and participate in child trafficking. So that was a pretty big turning point for me. I think that documentary just was pretty shocking to me as well. And I really just started interviewing victims, reaching out to people, and yeah, it's kind of gone from there.
How many victims have you interviewed?
It's hard to say. I don't know. At least a few dozen, I would say.
No.
At this point, yeah.
What's something that stands out to you from all of the different people?
I think two things. Like the first thing is just how long-lasting the trauma is, and we can talk about the idea of false memories and repression and things like that. But these people are living with the consequences of these things, and I interview them, and some of them want to maintain pseudonyms, or they they're not doing this to get attention, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
It's not attention anyone would want.
Yeah, and some of them are afraid to even come out because they think their perpetrators are going to re-victimize them. And so I think it's just it's really, this whole experience has been really eye-opening for me, just in understanding how the mind and the soul works. And Richard, I think you said, this was really interesting when you talked about, I think it's in First Timothy or James, one of those, where it talks about, having a double-minded person and that being evidence of, I think, some kind of soul fracture, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it seems as though there's not really a lot of credence given to this concept of dissociation and fragmenting of the personality. But I think this is a huge area where trafficking survivors are going to start being almost like modern day prophets, and that they start revealing things to us about trauma and the way that even just every day, even if you haven't been trafficked, the way that your mind is coping with certain situations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something that, I think most people to a degree disassociate. I think a lot of people will mention things like, hey, when something gets really stressed, I put on Netflix, I get ice cream. They're trying to, not feel those feelings. They're trying to push it away, push it aside. People use different kind of, coping mechanisms. What these people go through is so much more intense, so much more extreme. It's like a magnifying, lens on that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, and then I guess the other thing is just how widespread. It's just been striking to me how widespread all of this is, and it really just seems as though.
Talk about that. How widespread do you see it?
Well, I think it's in all kinds of institutions, right? More recently, I've been investigating the Salt Lake area and talking to a lot of victims in this area. It seems like there's a lot of clustering of victims in this area, which people said, a lot of this, it goes back to the LDS Church, and there's questions about the founders' ties to Freemasonry and things like that. So I think it's in multiple denominations. I think it's in different secret societies. You hear victims talking about going to government buildings. And this was all over the country that I hear this. It's not just from people in Salt Lake Yeah.
We've been hearing it it's interesting because I've been doing this kind of ministry. Well, not this kind of ministry. I've been doing healing and deliverance and stuff like that for 25 years. Mm-hmm. But it was over 10 years ago, I would say. I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but in that time frame where it became front and center for us. And in that time frame, the number of clients that come here from all over the world, from every walk of life, from every denomination almost, even some of the biggest named churches in our country. And I'm in some of those churches, the pastor has nothing to do with it whatsoever and wouldn't have a clue that this has gone on in his church. But there are other places where it's church leaders. Well, actually, there's a decent number where somebody involved in a leadership position at church, not a lead pastor. I am sure we are going to come across that, and we probably have, but now the people that are coming to my mind, was it like a senior pastor? Although I would guarantee that I'm not thinking of somebody that is, but a lot of times it's children's work or a worship leader or something like that who's also involved in satanic stuff. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's all different levels. And for example, the recent article that I published in the Epic Times, I was interviewing the case manager for Father Ripperger, who's he's an exorcist, and he deals with satanic ritual abuse victims. But the case manager was even saying, they come across people where they can essentially tell that their perpetrators are people within the Catholic hierarchy. So like cardinals or bishops.
Yep.
And,
we hear that a lot.
Yeah. And so I think it's I'm Catholic. And so obviously I'm not against the church as a whole. And I don't think that the church,
right,
really any church, I would say, most of the Protestant denominations, I'm not going to say that they're inherently satanic. I think that there's obviously issues with people with, I think what happens is that these groups infiltrate or.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's, Another thing that we deal with a lot is pretty broken people who were molested as children, end up becoming Christians and getting involved in missions, church ministry, whatever. Mm-hmm. And they don't even know their level of brokenness. And the next thing you know, some of them have been high up in the hierarchy of different major. Everybody that's listening that's a Christian would probably know some of the organizations high up in leadership, and they were molesting people. They love Jesus. Yeah. They witness, because we get to minister to these people, and that's devastated their life. And it's their choices. But they're like, I do love God. I do follow God. And I don't know why this happens until we're dealing with the fractured soul. And they're recovering memories. Well, some of them have memories already of stuff that I can't fathom. Just their normal memories in childhood are beyond my wildest dream. And that's before we even do what we call broken soul.
Yeah, I think this whole topic is really interesting for sort of understanding the mind of a perpetrator. Because I think even victims will tell you that they think their perpetrators are dissociating at some level when they engage in this sort of acts. And it's true, I'm not trying to absolve anyone of responsibility or culpability, but I think that even in, for example, the Utah case, if you look at the documents in that, you have some of the alleged perpetrators, at least one, is sort of like suggesting that they may have been programmed. They're saying, like, I'm open to exploring the fact that I might have been programmed.
We deal a lot with mind control programming and stuff like that.
Right.
And so, yeah.
I mean, even just what the government puts out, the government, when they did their research, they said the average person who's molested as a child will molest 4 people in their lifetime. That's underreported. You have to imagine it's an underreported statistic that you don't even know all the people who are molested, but just from what they're able to prove, that's like the average. So you take out agendas, programming, all that stuff, bad root, bad fruit, good fruit. When you have that trauma that goes unhealed, there's brokenness that needs to be healed.
Yeah.
Well, and victims talk about participating in rituals and things like that because they're forced to, or because they feel they feel coerced. And at what level, it's because they've been exposed to violence, right? So they have this implicit threat behind whatever they're told to do. And some of it might be more explicit, where they literally say, if you don't do this, I'm going to hurt someone. So
their children, their parents, themselves. There's threat behind so much programming. And early on, when people that have been programmed, they are, they're forced. They're put in a situation where you either inflict pain on this person or yourself. And how does somebody make that choice? And that kind of stuff is done over and over and over again. Yeah.
Right. Well, and they can't really. They have to dissociate because it's such an extreme situation that they're not familiar with. It's like they're shocked into submission, I think, and splitting off a part of themselves.
All right. So can you tell us a little more about some of the investigation you've done into this and some of the stuff that you found and the research and that kind of stuff? Because it's one of the things for us to talk about our experiences and people we've talked to. It's another thing for that kind of stuff that I think really puts a lot of, I've read some other people who've done investigative thing, and it's really put it into perspective on how real and everything going on. So is there anything you can share about that?
Yeah. So it's hard to get evidence for any of this, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the survivors' testimonies are very compelling, and especially when you have, for example, multiple people coming from the same family talking about their parents, for example, being a part of a satanic cult, or you have multiple people talking about the same perpetrator. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I'd say my investigation, to the extent I've been able to investigate, is there hasn't been a ton of physical evidence that I've been able to find. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Like therapists talked about receiving physical evidence. There's a study in the 90s, I think, that talked about receiving physical evidence, although they ended up noting that there wasn't enough to prove some kind of extensive network of satanic cults that were acting together to commit these crimes. you know, I guess like where I've been concerned is like I've mostly just been trying to interview victims and see what's out there, and so that's mainly what I've been focused on. And I'm currently working on a story just about the trauma and healing process and trying to understand how the mind works and how it reacts to these types of crimes. There is a really interesting case in Utah right now, and it's surrounding a therapist or former therapist who was accused. It looks like there's lengthy victim statements from his daughter multiple daughters accusing him and his family and prominent members in the community of being a part of a satanic cult within the Church of Latter-day Saints, so within the Mormon Church. And, it looks like they're corroborating each other extensively, talking about the same events at times, talking about similar elements, the same perpetrators, things like that.
How do you find different people when you interview them? Because like you said, it's not something that most people they're not posting on social media, hashtag I'm an SRA victim. How do you go about finding people to interview?
It's usually just through word of mouth, and, I'll interview someone and say, is there anyone else you think I should talk to? And usually they know someone, or if they don't, that's okay. I'll go on YouTube and look at testimonies and reach out to people that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Interesting.
Takes a lot of courage for people to come forward with that.
For sure.
Because it is pretty unbelievable. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it is. And that's why I usually tell people, if you want to talk to me, I just want to learn at this point. And so it's, if you don't want me to publish anything, like we can do an off the record conversation, or it can be anonymous, something like that.
What percentage of yours are anonymous and don't want anybody to ever hear it, and what percentage are open to it being shared?
It's hard to say. I'm not sure at this point. Yeah. I'd say most of the interviews that I do at least start off anonymous or off the record, and then you can talk later about what sorts of things they want to share more publicly.
How has this impacted your heart, your mind, your life?
A lot of ways. It's I feel like this past 2 years has been just a roller coaster of really just trying to grapple with all the things that the survivors are saying. I mean, you hear things that I've interviewed people that are they've been abused as part of what seem to be local covens, all the way up to CIA, military, mind control, and then you even hear things beyond that in terms of UFOs or aliens and secret space programs, and that's I haven't really been able to interview as many people involved in that type of environment, but I think it's also helped me to make sense of a lot of things, and just in the sense that all these things were sort of mentioned or a part of ancient cultures, and then it seemed as though they disappeared. But it makes more sense if you think about them as just going underground. And then you just see things within the political atmosphere that seem to not make sense, and it's almost like I think I was at this point where I was covering major news and involved in the everyday news of politics, and just something just seemed off. It just seemed weird, and you kind of wonder what's beneath the surface. And like what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein, right? Or why is it that we approve like the mass slaughter of preborn children throughout the country every year? Why is that being pushed from the highest levels of government? And I just think there's that when you start talking to victims and you hear their stories and the things that they describe and the way that these cults work, you start understanding the mindset behind some people in elite positions and what their interests are. And then, I think that
Have you interviewed any clients that were victimized by people high up in our government or Hollywood or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think. I mean, I've interviewed Kathy O'Brien, for example.
Oh yeah,
I've talked to her a fair amount, and she names all kinds of people within the government.
I would love to get in touch with her. If you can ask her permission, but if you could share her contact, not right now to everybody. But I'm just gonna ask you right now because it's in my mind. But I want to get in touch with her.
Sure, yeah, I can reach out to her about that.
Well, so our audience doesn't know Kathy O'Brien. Tell me a little bit about what you know.
Kathy is, from what I can tell, so the media likes to talk about Michelle Remembers and Michelle Smith and that case in Canada, which I think Michelle Remembers did predate Kathy, but I sort of see Kathy as the main whistleblower for MK Ultra after, the 70s and the hearings that took place then. And she came out with Transformation of America. She came out with, she released, I think, 3 different books, including one on how to heal. But her basic story is that she was sold into MK Ultra and this pedophilic satanic ring within the government by her father, who she thinks was, I think, caught because he was participating in a pedophilia ring or participating in pedophilia and child porn. She names all kinds of people: George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. A
lot of the biggest names in the political arena are in her story.
Robert Byrd, she says he was a former senator. She says he was one of her main abusers. Who else?
And she was married to him, wasn't she?
Robert Byrd,
I think she was.
I don't think so she talks about exiting that whole situation with the help of an intelligence agent, and his name, Mark, I think that's his name. Yeah. And help in getting his help. But I don't think she was married to Robert Byrd. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I may be wrong, but I think so. But yeah.
Yeah. And one person that she names is Michael Aquino. And I think there needs to be more attention paid to him because she isn't the only person I've talked to.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a
military general.
Right. He was a military general, or he was high up in the military. He was the head of the Temple of Set, which was I think it was a offshoot from whatever was the main satanic religion around that time. And so, yeah, he's been, I've heard his name quite a few times and his involvement in programming, military style programming.
One of the people we were ministering to, and I'm going to make this as veiled as possible, but, there's an organization that has a lot of children that they take credit for getting out of human trafficking, and it is funded completely by the Devil's Gate, California, the Jet Propulsion Labs, which is where the Temple of Set and Ron L. Hubbard and Parsons were to start that. And I'm going, like, you and I have talked a little bit about this, how disturbing it is to find people that are involved in satanic ritual abuse claiming to help victims, claiming to have organizations, ministries that are helping overcomer or helping survivors of human trafficking. And it's just the cycle. It's on the front, they look like they're doing something good, and it's a way of hiding what's going on, getting money from people, and putting people right back into the system. And you've seen that?
I've heard that before, yeah.
Okay.
And, I haven't been able personally to verify any of that.
Yeah.
But I know that there's definitely suspicion about some of those organizations.
Yeah.
I think I probably know which one you're talking about.
Well, no, this is one that most people wouldn't have heard of, but it's because its headquarters is in a third world country, but they house hundreds of children, and it was actually one of the children of the founders that had come for ministry, and even before they recovered any memories of anything, they were I'm asking the questions because I know what kind of questions to ask. The longer you're in it, the more you know what to ask and what to look for. Mm-hmm. And at the end of our very first session, I said, do you know what your family's really doing? And she said, they're running an international human trafficking ring. I never said a thing. I'm just asking the questions, and I'm going, can you see a pattern? Do you see anything going on here? And she put two and two together. She was struggling with letting her children be seen. And she's talked about this openly and given me permission to talk about it before. So we're going to have her on as a guest one time. But that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing for her because to bring some of that to light is to call out a well-funded Christian organization that's supposedly fighting human trafficking. And
Yeah, I think that's like what you said about, and I didn't really ask, I just asked her, what is her family really doing? I think there's kind of this misperception that there's all these there's all these manipulative therapists that are leading people into false memories.
Yeah.
But, I mean, at least from what the victims tell me and the therapists that I've talked to, that's not really, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
Or they may ask something like, they'll ask, about like, I don't know, Omega or some kind of the name of a program without getting into more detail. And then just all this stuff comes out about, the ways that they were programmed within military settings, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the idea, part of the disassociation is like, you don't want to admit what happened to you. Like you're trying to, hide from it. So like, even if you do certain things you do remember, you're going to put a different like lens on it. People kind of do that for everything. Like you might've been abused by someone and it can take you a long time to admit that what that was abuse. You can change the name too.
Yeah. I think I mean, a lot of the people I talk to, it's like, they're hoping or they feel like they're going crazy when they first have their memories, and they're like, what is this? And then they feel like they're hoping that they can just take a pill or something and make it go away. But then they realize that this actually happened to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has this affected your career going down all of this?
I'm sure there's people who are probably like, he's crazy. I mean, I haven't heard that. No one said that to my face, but I'm sure there's people who probably are like, think I'm a conspiracy theorist or something. But I kind of don't really care. I mean, I feel like this is really the most important issue as far as I can tell. And I feel like there should be more journalistic attention paid to it, but there seems not be. And in fact, I think the media has done really just like one of the most evil and horrific things that they could do by gaslighting victims and just like acting as though, just sort of blanketing allegations and calling them, describing them as part of some kind of social or political panic. And you saw that with the coverage of the Utah case, and it was just really shameful in my opinion. And I think it was similar, to be honest, like before I got into all of this, I was covering a lot of education and critical race theory type of stuff. And it was a similar phenomenon where it's like the media almost sort of just ignores the content of the allegations, and they just start trying to reframe it for the way that people consume it, so that they just pretend that it's some kind of panic or falsehood that's being perpetrated. And it's really frustrating, but
I am so glad. It's like, what do they call it? Conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory is no longer like the most taboo thing to have or be. It's kind of like, because so many of the quote conspiracy theories it's coming to light. I just heard from my wife last night, so I haven't verified this, but my wife is a good researcher. But she was like, is it Ted Kennedy Jr.? The one that's known for anti-vaxxing. He's actually thinking of running for president, I believe. But he said the evidence is now he has seen the evidence, and it will be coming to light that John F. Kennedy was killed by the CIA. It's like there's a lot of people going, duh, but not the world. But they're saying that he has seen the evidence, and it is now about to become public knowledge. And I was like, wow.
I mean, yeah, Tucker basically said that on his show, right? Like,
yeah,
he said that he had a source who claimed the CIA was involved in the assassination.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a joke, right? Like, there's people making fun of it, making fun of the idea that there was some kind of magic bullet that ended up ending JFK's life, as on Seinfeld. They're talking about a magic loogie, and it's just, I don't know. It's kind of funny because it's...
Yeah, they work hard to hide all this stuff. But there's so many stories that are being recanted by mainstream media, because the information is so easily found that for them to have any credibility left, they're having to admit things.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience with mainstream media, with the truth?
Yeah, it's... So I was at Fox before all of this. I'll just say I think that there's definitely limits on what you can say. And yeah, I think, and there's obviously like variability, right? Like, I don't think that I would have been able to report as much or in the way that I did on critical race theory if I was at like NBC or one of those outlets. But I think that there are still limits on what you can say. Just generally, I'm not even specifically saying a particular outlet. I just think that the public needs to sort of be more receptive to something before the media can go in depth on it, and which is a frustrating reality, because it's like, what role do you play as a journalist if you're trying to uncover truth? I mean, is it like you can't talk about certain things even though they're true, right? And so I try not to do that, and I think that my main interest is just educating the public on these things that I'm finding and saying, the prevailing narrative about, for example, the satanic panic is really just nonsense and incredibly irresponsible journalistically. And I think that people need to sort of broaden their horizons in terms of what they think is possible.
You having worked for Fox, is there any chance that any other major outlets would let you work there? Any of the mainstream media, or are you blacklisted at having worked for Fox?
Yeah, I'm probably blacklisted. I mean, especially now, like I wouldn't even. But before, I was probably blacklisted in some ways, and to be honest, I don't really care. I mean, I don't want to work for CNN. I don't want to work for NBC, especially, and I don't want to work for the New York Times. That's not the type of work that I want to do. I think a lot of what they do is dishonest, and I think they especially are interested in furthering a particular narrative that I don't want to be a part of.
Yeah. I heard someone talk about they were an intern at I don't remember if it was CNN or NBC or where it was, but they said that it wasn't the accuracy was not as important about being the first to report on something. So when it came to different like trending things, it was like get something out there, get the conversation started, and talking was more important a lot of times than being accurate or the truth. It was almost like how it plays out, how the general perception is more important than accuracy.
Yeah, I think there's like an interesting conversation to be had about whether or not about nonprofit versus for-profit media, just because there is such a high pressure, especially now in the digital age, and the concern with clicks and ads and things like that. And yeah, it's. I guess I don't know if I'm as concerned about that as I am about just there being sort of predominant narratives that silence certain realities from coming to light. Sorry.
What are some of those narratives from your vantage point?
Well, I think that the education discussion surrounding critical race theory, that was a big thing in 2021, where you just had outlets sort of dismissing it. CNN even, said something like, these people don't even know what critical race theory is, and just like really disrespectful things to do to parents who are coming forward with like genuine concerns about their kids' education. And I think that that sort of thing, and then I think also the idea that there's elite trafficking going on, and that's starting to change with like the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict, and people are starting to demand more information related to that. But even that's encountering roadblocks. I think that the idea that there's an intelligence connection to some of this trafficking, that's probably something that needs to be explored more. And I think those would be some of the
intelligence is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Or actually, they need to invent a word because it's diabolical. It's intelligent evil. There's a lot of that.
Where do you get your news from?
I have a lot of Google alerts that I look through.
Okay.
So that's the main thing. I kind of just look through those. Sorry, my dog is kind of being.
He's like, I want some attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give him some pretzels. It's just that helps. So yeah. Sorry, what was the question again?
Where do you get your news? You said Google alerts.
Yeah, Google alerts, Twitter. To be honest, a lot of me interviewing victims has made me sort of just tune out from a lot of the mainstream media, because when you listen to the victims, they talk about how there are these interests at higher levels to perpetuate certain narratives within the media that you may not even realize are false narratives or sort of like distorted narratives. And Tucker was sort of getting at this too. I don't know if you saw, he had a video that came out recently, but I think that they, when you start hearing from victims and like the perpetrators that they say they're involved with, or that have committed these crimes and what they're involved with, the organizations they're involved with, you start just thinking, I don't even know if it's really worth me consuming that much news at the mainstream level. Like I try, and again, I was like in the middle of it. Like I was, I've been a breaking news reporter. I've been, on Capitol Hill interviewing senators and trying to get the latest on whatever's happening. But I think that the reality in terms of what the victims say is so radically different than what we see in the news and what we think is actually going on that, to be honest, I don't really consume mainstream news services anymore. I mean, I don't really go to InfoWars either. I don't really use those. I kind of just look at what's going on Twitter.
What do you think about Tucker Carlson saying he's going to go to Twitter? What are your thoughts on that?
It's good. I mean, I'm skeptical about
the numbers.
I guess I'm skeptical about what his interest is, and what he wants to reveal.
What makes you suspicious? Can you say?
I don't really want to get into it at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I get you.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I like what he's doing otherwise. I think that it's great that he's challenging traditional narratives. I mean, that thing with him saying that about the CIA and the Kennedy assassination on one of his shows, I think everyone was, a lot of people were like, oh, come on, like, let's go. You should have, we all kind of knew this already, but still it was a big thing to say on primetime television.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah.
I just read a little bit about Trump being on CNN, and I thought that's got to be fake news, but it was real. And it really backfired on him from what I hear, because they went after stuff like the election fraud and tried to make him look like an idiot. And he goes, everybody in the country knows. anybody who's denying that there was an election fraud is got their head in the sand. And I mean, like, this guy didn't back down on one thing that they tried to, that he's even under indictment. And it just supposedly like it was so well received in his favor and against CNN is what I heard. I haven't looked broadly, so it's just one article about it. Of course, the mainstream media is going to jump all over it, but the more they do that, I think the more they are losing credibility and viewership.
You mean Trump, the more Trump is losing credibility, or the more the media is like denying?
The more the media is spinning false narratives that you are hard to deny.
Mm-hmm. I think like anytime you see there's this like knee-jerk reaction to push a particular narrative or deny something, it's almost like, what are you trying to hide? Yep. And I think that's what's happened with the election integrity. I think, I haven't looked into that super in depth, but I think there's legitimate questions to ask. Yeah. And so I think we should be able to have that conversation.
That's the thing. Having a conversation seems to be almost impossible with anyone. Like, it's pretty much like, if you don't believe what I believe, you hate me and you hate everyone and you want us all to die. Like, that's the narrative that gets twisted.
And even a lot of the social media platforms are the moral police, the truth police, and they definitely have an agenda.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, my dog is
a
little bit crazy.
Dad, do you have Twitter?
Do I have Twitter? I do have a Twitter account, but
you have like 4 Twitter accounts.
I don't even know how to get on my Twitter account.
I confiscated one of your Twitter accounts for the Mull It Over podcast.
Yeah,
I changed the name of it, the username, and the image. It's now the Mull It Over podcast, and it posts our podcast whenever it launches.
Cool. So I'll have to get on.
You still have at least 2 other podcasts or 2 other Twitter accounts.
That somebody else has set some of those up. Like, we had a guy that was doing social media for us. I'm sure he probably set one up.
Yeah.
And then...
Well, you have 2 with your actual name, Richard Mull. One's like Richard D. Mull, and one's Richard Mull.
Really?
Yeah. One of them you've never posted on. One of them you've posted on a couple of times. Oh. And I know it's you posted because it's not something that anyone else would post as a way to grow social media followers. Yeah. So...
I need to learn Twitter, don't I?
I was going to say, I think that I'm really encouraged by a lot of what's happening, I think, in the media environment. And I'm hoping that there's like a balkanization sounds really bad, right? And it sounds like something that entails a lot of chaos and disorder, but I'm really hoping that there's going to be, I'm glad that there's all these different shows and things emerging, podcasts and different sources of information, and so that there's not as much centralized power. And it's usually like, it wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't, if there was centralization of power within the media, but you just don't see certain things covered or talked about, and so that needs to change.
I think my generation, I don't know how old you are, but we don't watch mainstream media. Like, I don't know anyone my age who watches or has ever watched mainstream media. It's Twitter, it's social media, it's YouTube, it's podcasts, like you're saying, like, yeah.
My mom is a pretty loyal Fox News viewer. She watches it all day, like every night. She's got it on, and my dad watches it a lot. And so, yeah, but I think there's definitely a generational divide. And but like, I don't really know anyone who watches, for example, CBS Evening News or those different evening news broadcasts.
What's that?
CBS.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah,
I'm kidding. They have these broadcasts, and
that's the only news we used to have. That was like, you lived for that 30-minute segment or hour-long segment every night,
right?
And picked your poison, I guess. But you respected it, and you respected the hosts, and so
I think that's done now, though.
Yeah.
Dan Rather, and some of that stuff that happened. With the Bush election, I think that they've kind of and then just the rise of conservative media, I think, has kind of tanked the mainstream media's credibility. So,
what do you mean? Explain that.
there's just been a lot of alternative sources that are showing what parts of certain stories that the mainstream media are hiding. So like before I was at Fox, I was at some other outlets, and then I was also at the Media Research Center. And part of my job was to watch these evening news broadcasts, or go in and look at what the
fact check.
Yeah, fact check.
Wow.
Just see like what they were. Yeah, see what they were leaving out, and some of it was just shocking. These are like the standard bearers for journalism, right? So, and you have them doing things that are really.
In your education and your grooming, was that encouraged? Was that
to like
explained away?
Things, or
just in as you were being groomed to be a journalist, were you being prepared that that's the way it goes, or were you taught one thing and then you hit the real world and it's different?
I think it's a little bit of that. Yeah, you're taught one thing and then you hit the road and it's different. I mean, I didn't go to school for journalism, so my introduction into journalism was more through conservative media and actually looking at what the mainstream. I was looking at what the mainstream outlets were doing and seeing how they were distorting things, and you sort of get the sense that. I mean, from my perspective, it's like the way that the mainstream media acts, they create this a sort of adversarial relationship with the people, and so then I think the people end up turning to other sources, and those sources end up they develop narratives of their own, and some of them are good and they're true, but there have been complaints, for example, that conservative media doesn't produce enough journalism, like actual investigative journalism, that it's a lot more counter programming, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So I heard Megyn Kelly's response to Tucker Carlson's firing, and that was pretty interesting. One of the things that I've wanted to go back, because there was a couple of things I wanted to write down, but she just rattled off. She goes, "You can't say anything that one of these," and she named 6 names, people that doesn't agree with what these 6 people are willing to say. And I was like, she just called it out, just blunt. Like, it doesn't matter what, platform you have in mainstream media. If these 6 people don't like what's being said, one of these 6,
really
you won't make the news.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the owners and
Mark Zuckerberg,
top producers,
Elon Musk.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Google.
She just rattled the names off so fast. I was like, I want to go back and write those names down and research them.
I'll have to look into that. Yeah, I mean, if you look at who owns these media companies, right? It's a lot of the same people, a lot of the same
who own the fact check companies. Yeah. That's interesting.
Really? I'll have to really looked into that.
Yeah, some of them were started off with real serious fact checkers, and then they were bought and forget fact checking ever again. they now it's just another way of keeping the narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg testified in court to the Supreme Court that the CIA and the FBI said, "Hey, block these things for these days and that stuff," and that they're like, well, if the government tells you to do it, you do it. That's not conspiracy theory. That's under oath.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to look past who the hosts are. You have to look past what your favorite personalities are saying and look at who owns the actual organization. And it's crazy how much the LGBT, quote unquote LGBT narrative, all of that has been just pretty much adopted by any mainstream organization. There's not really a lot of pushback on that. Again, you'll have individual personalities talking about it, but it's as a whole, it's different.
Yeah.
What do you think about cancel culture?
Cancel culture. it seems pretty fascistic, I guess. Right? Yeah, the idea that we're gonna shut down someone because they're saying something that's been common sense for like centuries, you know. I mean, really, like saying a man can't be a woman and that type of stuff will just get you canceled. At the same time, I think because of the way that the way that elites seem to be governing these organizations and the way that they all seem to be connected and following a single script, I think it's good when conservatives can fight back and say, we're not going to buy your product anymore, right? Like with Budweiser, I think that's kind of the only check at this point. And that seems to be more organic too, right? Like I don't know if there's, I know, for example, Matt Walsh has called for some kind of boycott of Budweiser, but the drop in sales that they saw, I think that was more organic and not something that was like centrally planned in any kind of way.
I love the story of the boycott of Chick-fil-A. You familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Love it. Yeah.
Yeah,
and it shows that the world does not believe
the silent
the
majority,
the mainstream flow. We had a guest on who got to college and in another state, so he comes from the South, goes up north, and they ask him, and they're introducing the first night in the dorms. Give us your name and where you come from and your pronoun. And he's there with another guy from Tampa, and he looks at each other. He goes, do you know what they're talking about? And they're like, no idea. And he said that everybody knew how to play along, but he said most of the people had grown up rural, were conservative, and didn't believe in any of it, and would be real with you, but they had to play the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
it's crazy.
Well, as people just using, people you thought were conservative are using alternative pronouns now, and it's like, what happened? Like, are you just abandoning truth at this point? Are you not interested in telling the truth anymore? Or are you just kind of, I don't know.
What is truth at this point? Like, they're like, what does people want to, hold? Like, is it what the mainstream media says? Is it the opposite? Like, I don't know. The arguments and the arguments that happen are not about let's find truth.
Yeah, I think it's true that it's hard. There's kind of like this new discussion about what is truth and how can we really confirm things? How can we know things for sure? But at the same time, like using alternative pronouns, that is like an ideologically driven. Yeah. That's like an ideologically driven lens on the truth, where it's deliberately obfuscating what is true.
Oh yeah,
right. So it's like that's a situation where that they're following some kind of ideology, whether they want to admit it or not. And when they do, it's not in the same vein as we're going to cite this or use this fact or cite this account because we're not sure what exactly is true, or like we're going to have a philosophical discussion about what truth is, right?
Even like you're saying, like, okay, the whole pronoun thing, right? Like what they have said, like the science to back it has changed every 3 weeks, or there's no consensus. Like if you ask, Matt Walsh's what is a woman, like none of them can answer because they're like, we're all fighting for something that we have no idea what we're fighting for. We just know this is what we have to do.
And that's what's like so interesting is that there's just such a conceited totalitarian like impulse to shut down discussion on this issue or just to like set the narrative. But it's just there at the very basis of it. There's this contradiction. There's a basic contradiction, which is that people say that there's certain criteria make you a woman, while other people say other criteria make you a woman, and it's just like it's all within the same movement. And people know, I think instinctively, that it's just false and that it's ridiculous. And so I don't think it's going to last that long.
It's not really a debate that they can win. You don't think it's going to last?
Yeah, I don't, because I think that it's different than, for example, quote unquote gay marriage, where that's more of something where it's like, I think you kind of convince people well, this makes someone comfortable, this makes someone happy, this is like their own lifestyle. But when you talk about forcing people to say something that they know is just so obviously untrue, right? Like transgenderism, quote unquote transgenderism, contains such, it embodies contradictions. It's not just that these are abstract sort of ideas that you have to like think about. It's just people on a visceral level know that it's untrue. And so, and I think it's gonna, I mean, as a movement, even if you don't, forget the people that are like, this is just ridiculous, right? Like there's just so much failure within the movement. You have all these detransitioners coming out and they're like, yeah, this was crazy. This was me trying to cope with something that I personally had to, I wasn't dealing with the issue itself. I was trying to deal with my depression, my OCD, whatever, through hormone therapy. And this is again like corroborated by Hannah Barnes. She's a BBC reporter who released a book on the main gender identity clinic in the UK. And she tries to say that this does not discredit transgenderism in general, but I think it does, right? Like I think it shows just how contradictory the philosophy is. She talks about like one of her examples is a boy who was told to transition when he was suffering with symptoms from OCD. And the basic gist of what she's saying is like, they should have dealt with this. And it's interesting if you listen to Walt Heyer, who's a former, he's a man who tried to become a woman and tried living that way for a while. But he said when he talks to kids who have been who have gone through or are seeking transition, purported transition, that he often asks them, what is it about yourself that you hate so much that you feel like you need to change it? And it's really interesting too, like going back to satanic ritual abuse, when you hear victims talk about altars and the way that they respond to trauma and how they split their minds. It's like, it's like you start looking at some of these people on.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. A high percentage of people that we've ministered to have parts that are alternate the other sex. And what's interesting is a lot of times I think I'm going to get some kind of mind control programming or satanic ritual abuse or horrific abuse. And a lot of times the reason for that part being what it is there's one time attractive, young, godly Christian woman is here. We connect with this part, and the name was Matthew. And I'm like, okay, what are we going to get to? Well, as a 5-year-old, mom didn't want to see her. And, mom was in the house doing stuff and said, just stay out here. Devastating. And then she's like, the boys get to do these things and the girls get to do these things. I want to be a boy. Mm-hmm. And it was like from that point on, it was like she grows up fully woman, never thought of being a man, but that one day, that trauma, that wasn't even like we deal with real traumas. Every trauma is a real trauma, whether it's perceived trauma or an actual trauma. This was a very strongly perceived trauma, like abandonment, rejection. But then it was a childlike way of dealing with it. It was like, I got to figure out life now. So the boys look like they're having more fun than the girls. I'm going to, what 5-year-old has that not run through their mind? It doesn't mean that that's who they are. It's just but God healed that part. It was amazing.
How can we hold the media accountable? Because I mean, there's misinformation. There's like some of the stuff you're talking about, like BBC's reporting this, like that's like abuse on a kid to try to convince a kid to do that. Like that's like I think that's criminal. You know what I'm saying? Like how can when the media is pushing pretty much criminal activity. Yeah. When the narratives come out that they're wrong and it just kind of disappears, like how do we hold them accountable? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, you gotta stop. I think you just gotta stop watching, stop listening to them, and openly criticize them. I mean, I really think that, I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers on this, but like I do think that the conservative movement has done a pretty good job of tarnishing the mainstream media's reputation. So
when I looked at the top 10 shows, now I haven't done deep research. It was before one of our podcasts. I just did a quick search. Top 10 shows were all Fox. And I was like, I didn't see anybody else listed, so I didn't keep going down, but it was like top 10 were all Fox. Tucker Carlson was 2, right below the 5.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do the ratings. Like before I was at Fox, there was another outlet, and we would report on the TV ratings. So I'd get those from Nielsen, which is a market research company, or I would get them from Fox. So I would get them through. Basically, I was getting Nielsen data, and they were talking about, it'd show like Fox would be beating out MSNBC and CNN combined.
Oh yeah, that's what they were showing. The numbers combining two of the bigger, non-conservative ones, and their numbers, were way less still combined.
I don't feel like Fox has as big of a influence though in the country. Like I feel like oftentimes the influence.
Well, it's one station against how many yeah. So numerically,
but even if numerically they're beating out the
I don't know.
Two,
I think their influence is bigger.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
They're definitely. I mean, they still have a huge audience, and but that seems to be changing with Tucker leaving.
Yeah.
Like their ratings have dropped, and they've just objectively done things to betray their audience. Like they've done things like pro-trans segments, and it's like. You'd be surprised when you start losing viewers or people get really angry at you.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Babylon Bee?
They're interesting. I don't know. I've definitely laughed very, very hard at some of their content, and I think they play a good role in keeping the media in check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw it was a CNN reporter. Commented on one of their Twitter posts, and like when they got their Twitter back, Babylon Bee posted something about how they were making fun of themselves, saying that they only have 2 jokes to make or whatever. And the CNN reporter said, "I think we've misunderstood these guys. I think they're way funnier than we realized if they're able to like have the self-awareness to make fun of themselves and all this different stuff." It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I enjoy them. Yeah, I enjoy them.
Who's the comment? The guy online that I can never remember his name. Red hair, long hair.
Oh, JP Sears.
JP Sears.
I just really enjoy your voice. I think
glad
people should
you like
comment if he should just keep this voice moving forwards. No,
JP Sears.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and he became a Christian. And when I first told Andrew, he's like, "No,
I was like, that's got to be satire. He's got to be making fun of people."
And I was like, "If it is, it's the best satire I've ever seen." And
do you know who JP Sears is?
Yeah, I've seen him before.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. He's not the only kind of like digital personality. I'm trying to think of who exactly, but I've seen other people talk about how they're converting to Christianity or at least considering God at this point. And they come from more secular backgrounds. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it shows you that the narrative of like Christianity being outdated and just kind of like it's inevitable that it's going to fall away with these developments in culture, I think is not true.
Nope.
And some of what they're doing is, I think some of the ways that the media is acting is so arrogant and just blatantly like against what the people believe, right there. And it's not a matter of reporting truth. Like they're not being courageous truth tellers. They're pushing ideologies and ideas and sort of setting narratives that are just blatantly against what people believe. And I think that they've kind of overplayed their hand in some ways.
How much? Okay. Who is like the highest up person at Fox? How old is the highest up executive at Fox?
I think it's Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
And how old is he?
He's really, I think, maybe like in his 80s. I'm not sure.
Okay, so same with CNN, NBC. There's like a lot of old blood. Is there going to be a change when will they put in someone younger who has a little bit better chance at connecting with other people, a little bit more open-minded?
Lachlan is so that Rupert's son is taking over or has taken over in some sense. I'm not sure who has more power at this point, but yeah, Rupert's son is.
I heard he was the one that pulled the trigger on Tucker Carlson. I'm not sure though.
Was it Lachlan? I thought it was Rupert. I heard something about. I think Rupert went to.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I trust you more than me, so.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know exactly. I was surprised when I saw that because I thought that it was mostly Lachlan who was in charge, but it seems as though Rupert is still pulling some strings too, and yeah. I write a lot for live action news. It's like the pro-life organization, so I write for them a fair amount. I write for the Epic Times and sometimes LifeSite as well. Yeah, you can follow me. My Twitter is just Dorman in DC. Yeah. I don't. I'm just working on just trying to investigate the ritual abuse angle more. And I'm trying to put something out about the trauma and the healing that they go through. So. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.